Over the last 2 years, Legend Story Studios has made the biggest change to the product to date, and yet nobody seems to be talking about it. And yes, of course, I'm talking about the artwork style of the cards that are being printed. It went from a high fantasy with a little bit of grit, pretty realism, to a more cartoonish fantasy over the last three sets. It's more softer artwork and not as much realism, not as much grit, but more cartoony versus high fantasy with a little bit of grit. It has made this change, and we've seen it in the last three sets for High Seas, Super Slam, and now Compendium, right? And overall, this is just the tip of the iceberg because that right there is the tip of the bigger iceberg, which is the soft rebrand I'm naming it. I think that this is an overall soft rebrand of the products of Flesh and Blood and just the business overall. And I want to get into it, man. I want to talk about it because nobody seems to be talking about it. I don't know where the people are. Because you had Fab 2.0, where literally there's an article, James White was talking about it, tons of content creators were talking about it for 6 months in nauseum. Like you couldn't scroll through YouTube without seeing a Fab 2.0 discussion. It was massively talked about, and that pales in comparison to this change of changing the artwork style of the game. Fab 2.0 was just, okay, we have two boxes, but now we're going to make one box. Ooh, and they had the history pack and everything. But that really pales in comparison to a complete soft rebrand. And I really want to get into that. And overall, just a high level summary of it, this rebrand has occurred. It is complete with Compendium of Wraith, in my opinion. Like it's totally transpired over the last year and a half, 2 years. But overall, the consumer base and the Flesh and Blood community doesn't know about it. They've done it into effect to where it's been very subtle and very, incremental over time to where the community and the customer base has not realized it. And the main question from that fact, right? The fact one is the artwork style has changed for the Flesh and Blood cards. It's now 60%, the OG high fantasy with a little bit of grit, and like 40% of this new artwork that is softer and cartoony. That's the first fact. The artwork style has changed, and it's part of a bigger rebrand. And the question now is, how is the community going to find out that this has happened? Is it going to be a late article from Legend Story Studios explaining the reasonings and what happened and, explaining it? Or is it the community who's going to find out and they're probably going to control the narrative to, why? So I really want to get into that. But before I do, I'm going to go step by step in talking about these topics. Now, first off, the artwork style change, if I haven't convinced you yet. So basically, again, this started with, in my opinion, right? It started with First Strike. That was like the first product that really went overboard into this new artwork style change. You can really see the pastel artwork and just the nature of the artwork was very more cartoonish fantasy. However, Rosetta did have sprinkles here and there of this cartoonish fantasy. But where it really ramped up is High Seas. High Seas was the first product. You can see it in the box art. You can see it in the product sheet. You can see it in the cards in the set. If you really look at it and think like, hey, does this look like a Flesh and Blood card? It had changed into High Seas for the most part. It was more of that 40% versus like in Rosetta, it might have been like 2 or 3%, right? And then after that, Super Slam went even harder. And then now Compendium of Wraith, it kept that same split of like, okay, a lot of these cards are more cartoonish fantasy versus high fantasy. So that's really the nature of how it's happened over the last 2 years. It first started in Rosetta, I believe, but it was a little bit of sprinkle. But then it went full force in High Seas, but it was hard to tell in High Seas because it was pirate theme. But it happened in High Seas, Super Slam, and now Compendium of Wraith. That's 3 sets in a row. So we can definitively say the artwork style has changed up to this point. Like I've heard a lot of different like thoughts and opinions, but overall, we gotta all wake up. It's happened. It has changed. Now, there's 2 things that I wanted to really hammer home with this. The first is the difference between a theme and a style. I'm saying the artwork style has changed. theme is more like if you think of Tales of Aria, right? Toa, right? That set was very lush and green and verdant because everything's in the forest, right? Versus Dynasty, where it's all in Volcor and there's fire and volcanoes and stuff like that, and it's more darker, right? Even though these two sets, Dynasty and Tales of Aria, have a different theme, the style of the artwork was the same. It felt like Flesh and Blood, man. It was high fantasy with a little bit of grit. Even Toa had, just a little bit of grit. And so that's really the big difference there. And I really want to hammer that home. And if anyone's still thinking that, like, oh, well, these are just new themes of different sets. It's, each set has different themes, Bronson. Well, I'll point to Super Slam and Heavy Hitters. That is the same location in Wraith. It is the Deathmatch Arena. So somehow the Deathmatch Arena looked one way in Heavy Hitters, and then in Super Slam, it looked like completely different. What happened here? And there's no explanation in the set, like, oh, the Aether went around and something happened, and boom, now everything's complete whatever that is, right? No, it's not like something happened to the Deathmatch Arena. The Deathmatch Arena was the same. It was the soft rebrand that had changed. And that's what I'm talking about with the artwork style had changed. So the first 5 years of the game of Flesh and Blood, I believe it was firmly high fantasy with a little bit of grit. And the last 2 years, it's been this softer, cartoonish fantasy, right? But I just wanted to distinct there is theme and style, and those are two completely different things. I'm saying this artwork style overall has changed, right? So the next thing I want to talk about is gore, right? Gore is nice in my opinion. Just being a little opinionated here, right? Versus more factual and objective. Is that I like it, but I don't need it in the game. And I'm not really talking about that. That's a completely separate discussion, right? When I say a little bit of grit, I just mean like, gritty. It's not like, pristine. It's, you have a little bit of grit. Gore is a little bit a part of that. But honestly, in my opinion, Legend Story Studios could take all the gore out of the game going forward and continue with the OG art, and I'd be happy as a clam. Would I miss it? Yeah, I'd like it. But overall, that's a way different discussion. We're not talking about that in this video or any of the videos where I'm talking about artwork style. That is beside the point. Do I like it? Yeah, but it's different from what I'm talking about with the artwork style. Now, that's like the two biggest things that I wanted to talk about. And overall, I know people are going to be like, well, Bronson, if you look at Compendium, you have this card, this card, this card, this card that looks like the OG art. And the best way I'd like to say this is that the artwork style has changed percentage-wise. So if you think about the OG art, like the first 10 sets of the game, those were 100% orange juice. And orange juice is the high fantasy with a little bit of grit. Milk is this new cartoonish fantasy, right? So now these new set like Compendium of Wraith, I think is like 60% orange juice, 40% milk, right? You have this Arnold Palmer type drink where it's mixed in there, and it's a percentage that's high enough to make it material to where you can really say that the artwork style has changed, if that makes any sense. But that's the best analogy I like to put it, is because if anyone says, hey, there's, these handful or 10 cards that look cool, yeah, they may look cool and they might be the same artwork style as the beginning of the game, but still, you have to look at the sets as a whole. You have to look at the box art. You have to look at other stuff. If you look at all that stuff completely, you can see that the artwork style has changed. So I really wanted to hammer that home, and that really wraps up just my conclusion of, hey, look, the artwork style has changed over the last 2 years. It hasn't been a very long period of time, but before that, for the first 5 years of the game, it was the same OG artwork that, I know and love. But anyway, I digress. Now I want to talk about the soft rebrand. So I'm not a marketing guy. Marketing is pretty cool, in my opinion. I watch YouTube videos about it, but I'm not a marketing guy. But I researched this term and I heard soft rebrand. So think about like a facelift, right? That's essentially what has been done to Flesh and Blood over the last 2 years. It has been, changed slightly to where, you can still notice it, but it's not like you like did a full like body, surgery or whatever and like completely revamped the game at all. No, it's just a little bit of an update to where it's still fantasy artwork. You're just making it a little bit more softer and cartoony for a younger demographic, and I think a little bit more female demographic, if I'm being completely honest. But I think that that is really what is going on, and it's not just the artwork style. Now, I first saw the artwork style because that's the thing I like to collect in the game, right? I'm mainly a collector. I like buying the cards, and it's ink on cardboard, but then there's an artwork piece, and I like a certain artwork style, and that changed. So that's how I noticed that. But then when I started digging around and looking and just using my eyeballs, I noticed a couple other things about this, right? So if you look at, the box art and then the event art, like if you look at the YouTube, events and everything, the art that they choose for those, and if you look at like just the marketing material, the product sheets, all that has changed as well. All that has changed to this new artwork style as well, which is very interesting. Also, the website design, that is completely overhauled. I think 2 or 3 months ago, that completely overhauled, and it does look like a newer, younger demographic, and it looks like this new artwork style is on the website, right? So you have that as well with the marketing assets, and then now you have Silver Age as well, which, if you think about Silver Age, it's basically just Blitz. I'm not sure why it's not just called Blitz, and then they renamed Blitz Classic or something, or OG Blitz or something, right? Like, why create a new name? And the reason why is to pump this, oh, hey, it's fast, fun, affordable, right? It's the affordable way of playing Flesh and Blood, and it's new. I think it's part of this overall rebrand of the game. And if you think of Compendium, it definitely does seem like Compendium is, doing a little soft rebrand here with all the OG cards. Like, oh, hey, this is what Heart of Fyendel looks like now. Oh, this is what, all these cards that are staples that you know and love, this is what they look like now, right? This is the rebranded version of those, right? And it's really interesting if you think about all of the Antiquity slot and Compendium, right? All the cards. Why don't one of those have the OG artwork? Think about that. Why don't one piece of artwork from the Antiquity slot have the old artwork style? Isn't that quite interesting? And the reason is it's because it's rebranding the artwork. It's showing the artwork in this new cartoony fantasy realm. So I just wanted to bring up those topics because it's not just the artwork style in the core product, right? It's the artwork style and all these different things. It's the website, marketing material. It's this new format that is being pumped. And then the new format also has new decks out there that also have this new artwork style on them. So it's not just the artwork style in the core product, it's everything else. It's literally the whole kitchen sink of what Flesh and Blood is being revamped or has been revamped in the last 2 years. And in my opinion, that fits the definition of what a soft rebrand is. It's just a little facelift. It's not a huge thing, but it's definitely a shift of what your product is and trying to appeal to, you're trying to appeal to a different demographic, being a more modern one or what have you. It's definitely a shift of how your product looks, right? So that is really my evidence for the soft rebrand. So thus far, I've told you why I think there's an artwork style change, well, how I know there's an artwork style change, and my evidence for a soft rebrand. Now, where we're currently at, in the beginning of 2026, is the community at the whole of Flesh and Blood doesn't realize that this has occurred. They don't know. And you might say, Bronson, well, you putting out this video, everyone's going to know. And I appreciate that sentiment. But I am just a normal guy in a normal room. These videos only get like 50 to 100 views. No one really gives a shit about my ass. I'm just being real. I'm a very small individual. Nobody really cares about these videos. I don't really affect the community as much, whatever. And I don't mean to be self-deprecating. I'm just saying the fact, right? It's not like I'm going to make a video and it's going to push people to be like, hey, he's got a point. So anyway, I just want to lead with that. So the big question now in my mind is, how is the community going to find out? And there's one of two ways. There's two ways that this is going to happen. and this is obvious, right? Either LSS tells the community, or the community finds out by themselves, and then they like pester LSS to get an explanation, and they get one, right? So let's go over with the first one where Legend Story Studios just comes out and says, hey, we're making a late announcement. Yeah, we did do a soft rebrand. This is Fab 3.0, and here's what we did, right? In my opinion, if I'm talking to LSS, you've got to spin this. I'm thinking about the best for the game. You got to spin this well, man. And the biggest hurdle that you could say that will really throw a wrench in things, if you say is, well, Flesh and Blood is for everyone, so we tried to make Flesh and Blood more for everyone. Like, that is not a good way to explain this. Even that, if that's what you think, it doesn't matter what, like, the people will hear, which is basically they'll hear like, oh, well, hey, for the people who really liked the art for the first 5 years of the game, thanks so much for your support and your money and for your interest, but now we're going in a different direction. In my opinion, that's what it's going to sound like. I have a way that I would spin this if I were you. Here's what I would do if I was Legend Story Studios. First, I'd say, hey, we're always trying to make the best product possible, right? And when you say that first thing, right, we're always trying to make the best product possible, you can list all these different things that you're doing, which is a lot. And that's what is great about Legend Story Studios, is they evolve over time. The second thing you can say is, hey, we received a lot of, a massive amount of positive reinforcement with our First Strike product that was supposed to be an auxiliary set, and we received a lot of internal metrics that made us realize that that was a really good way to please our customers if we, made more cards with this new artwork style, right? We tested it out in First Strike, and it was a massive success. And you can even point to Aurora and say, hey, she was really popular, and it's probably because of this artwork. If that's true or not, who knows? But that is what you can say. Now, the third thing you can say is, hey, we tried to we put it in like high seas and it was also a major hit, but also like we try to just appease the customer, and that's what we did, something along that line. And I'm not a wordsmith. I'm not really good at spinning things, but you have to spin the narrative. And the subsequent question you'll be asked is, hey, why didn't you tell us in the beginning, like 2 years ago, why you did this soft rebrand? And the answer for that is, hey, we didn't want to influence our customers' reception of it, because we get feedback from the customer, and we wanted to, do things in steps and get feedback versus just telling them what they should like. So listening to what they like instead of just telling them, hey, this is what we did and you're going to like it. That's the best way I would spin this, and how I would explain this in an article in some way, shape, or form. Now, there's a lot of better orators and big brain people at LSS. They could probably think of something better. But long story short, saying Flesh and Blood is for everyone, I think, is not a good way to explain why you did a soft rebrand. I'm just going to say that first and foremost. Now, that's the first way that people will find out, is an article, right? And that would be lovely. Do what you want, but that would be lovely. Now, the second way people are going to find out is they're going to find out because they just have eyeballs and they see things and they notice that it did change. And overall, I think now you don't have anything that's very controversial. You don't have anything that's like really throwing like people for a loop. But in my opinion, I think in the next year to 3 years, you're going to have a piece of artwork that goes a little overboard. You're going to have a piece of artwork that pushes the limit a little bit too much. And it's going to spark this conversation. And I think what's going to happen is players are going to reevaluate their perceptions of what Flesh and Blood artwork is against the reality of what the last 2 years have been, and then realize that, whoa, my perception and reality met, and it's completely different. And I think that they're going to get upset. And I think in the moment, this type of scenario that plays out, it may seem like they're upset at something else, but in reality, they're just like, hey, this isn't Flesh and Blood art. I don't know what this is, right? It's not like the first 5 years of the game that, I was into. So That's what I think is going to play out. And overall, I think that it's going to be really hard to control the narrative from Legend Story Studios' perspective if they let the consumer figure it out, and then a bunch of people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever have you go rah 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 with their pitchforks and poke LSS and they're like, hey, tell us why. Why'd you do this? Why'd you do this? And then they get an answer. It doesn't matter what LSS says at that point. They're going to create their own answers, and their answer will be, well, they did this rebrand. It's a soft rebrand, and they changed the artwork style, and they didn't tell us because they were worried that we wouldn't buy their cards anymore, and they were worried that we wouldn't like it. So overall, I don't think it's good for the consumer to base a narrative. And again, this, going back to the very beginning, this is the biggest change to the product of these Flesh and Blood cards to date. And yet you have no article, nothing from any event talking about this, no dev talk. There's literally zilch anywhere out there publicly where Legend Story Studios specifically says the artwork style of our game has changed over these last 3 sets, like starting with High Seas, or hey, we did a soft rebrand, or anything along the lines of this. And you may say, Bronson, well, they did say that, some artwork is this or that. They may have, but they've never said that there's an artwork style change and that they're doing it going forward. Because I think there's a lot of people who are still on this mental mindset that, oh, well, these are just a couple fun sets and, we're going to get a Dusk Till Dawn soon, or we're going to get a Outsiders, or what is it? We're going to get some really OG set coming up. It's coming. So, I think you still have those people, but in reality, the artwork style has changed, my dude. It's changed. So, that's really what I have to say about that. And some other situation that's occurred in the past that I want to really, use it as a case study of what I think will play out, right, with this, is the Cold Foil Art of War. Now, I think a lot of people thought when the Cold Foil Art of War got dropped, right, back in the day, a lot of people know about this, but if you don't, essentially collectors got upset because they saw that the collectability of the game had changed and they thought Cold Foil Art of War went over the top, right? And a lot of people thought they overspeculated. Collectors thought it was a breach of, confidence, but bada bing, bada boom, it is what it is. However, just forget everything you know about that situation, and I'll tell you what it really was. What it really was is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. It was a false perception meets reality moment, right? The false perception was collectors thought collectability was up here, and the reality was the collectability wasn't as high up. And there were 2 main factors with the Cold Foil Art of War situation. The first being cards get less flashy over time. People thought this because Fab 2.0, you had history pack printing in white border, and every time Legend Story Studios reprinted a card for the first 3 years of their game, the cards got less flashy. What happened is, after year 4 and year 5, that changed. And people who were collecting didn't realize that. Also, and you could say that they over-speculated, but you can definitely see from a history pack white border that Legend Story Studios did have an aspect of reprinting cards that were less flashy over time. Right? There was a precedent for it, but I digress. The second big thing that collectors realized is that CF reprint policy was bogus. It was just a joke. And I say that with all sincerity. If you look at there's 2 big paragraphs for the Cold Foil reprint policy. Near the bottom of the second paragraph, it literally says, we reserve the right to reprint any Cold Foil we want for competitive play purposes, period. And what's crazy about that is literally it has all this nice jargon up top in the first paragraph that says oh, if it's printed in Cold Foil in a box, we won't print it ever again, blah, 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 blah. And then at the bottom it says, oh yeah, we can print it any time as long as it's for organized play. And it's and it's not just me who saw this. All the content creators are talking about this. Everyone was talking about it, and that's what I was talking about. So there's those 2 factors. The one, the Cold Foil reprint policy, people read it and figured out it wasn't as good and there really wasn't as much promises in there. And then also the what is it? The cards get less flashy over time. They realized that that didn't exist. So their perception of the collectability was higher, but then the reality was lower. And when those met, people got angry. People got frustrated. And I think you're going to have a similar situation with the card style and the artwork style of the cards. Is that currently we're living, and this is very important, I'm summarizing it right now. We're living in a world where people believe the artwork style of Flesh and Blood hasn't changed, or it hasn't materially changed, or it's still the old style and this is just a new theme. They don't realize the artwork style has changed. They don't realize that there's been a soft rebrand. But they're gonna find out. So their false perceptions will meet reality. And when that occurs, there's usually emotion from it because they realize they were wrong. They realize that they had operated under a false premise. And I think this situation is going to be completely different because collectability is a subjective, like random, topic, right? That is hard to define. However, artwork style and your brand is completely controllable by the company and very easy to communicate to the customer. So that's really what I want to say, right? And I think that, again, it's when false perceptions meet reality. The false perceptions people in the Flesh and Blood community have right now is that the artwork style hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. The same artwork style, but it has changed. And it will continue being this new, cartoonish fantasy, whatever it is. Anyway, that's really kind of the basis for what I'm talking about. So just to recap, before I go on a little bit of a rant, Flesh and Blood has had the biggest product change to date in the last 2 years, being this soft rebrand. The biggest part of that is the artwork style of the cards. It has changed. It has changed in the last 3 sets, and it will probably go in the future, right? And really, there's 2 ways that this could go down. Either Legend Story Studios makes a late article, or they have a dev talk, or they release something that explains what they did and explains why they, released the information late, which they absolutely could, and that would help them control the narrative. Or they could wait, and then the community will probably figure this out once it gets to set 5, 6, 7, hopefully. But they will find out, and there could be some emotion over a certain card, a certain hero, a certain whatever. There could be emotion that they release, and they're like, hey, what's happening here? And it's because perception reads reality. So that's where we're at, right? So overall, I want to rant a little bit at the end. Of course, I'm trying to talk about this all with just facts and logic and just piecing it all out, right? But personally, I love Flesh and Blood. I love the game. And overall, if the game changes in a way that outgrows me, I'm good with that. As long as it's a smart, rational decision that makes them better in the long run. If Flesh and Blood gets 2x, 3x player base and they just completely skyrocket over the next 2 years, I'd be so happy. I'd be like, hey, the artwork style that changed and everything with the game changed, but it was a good thing. Even if I'm not the primary demographic, it's a good thing that Flesh and Blood is doing good. And, the revenues of the company is doing, and the most amount of people are playing the game. That's great. And do I think that because of this soft rebrand, they, will, go bankrupt in a year? No. That's stupid. I think that they will still be operating for the next 5, 10 years easy. However, I don't think they will be as profitable, and I don't think they will maintain as much of a player base and as much of an interest with this new rebrand, the soft rebrand. I think it's going to detriment the game in the 5 to 10 year period versus be a boom. I could be wrong. Again, I'm just a normal guy in a normal room. What do I know? However, I want to get into a couple interesting things. Now, Legend Story Studios with this soft rebrand is obviously trying to cater to 2 demographics. They didn't say this, but it's kind of obvious. So the 2 main demographics are the young demographic, which is under 16. So I'm saying 14, 15 range, right? 16. they're trying to cater to that group a lot. And then also, in my opinion, they're trying to cater to women and be more feminine. You can see the Frankie, not the Frankie hero card, but the hero card is a little bit. But then you have the specialization card, which is like some monsters and scissors. It's just, it is what it is. And then you have, all I need to say after this is you have Pleiades, who's a pink and purple woman guardian with an electric guitar. Like, why is that not a bard? Who knows? But a pink and purple female guardian with an electric guitar, like that, I rest my case. And I'm not saying, I know people are like, oh, he just doesn't want women guardians. No, you have Valda. Valda's great. Valda looks great. It's the OG artwork, and she looks like a badass. Good job, right? So that one is great. So anyway, those are the two demographics that LSS is trying to hit with this new cartoonish fantasy artwork, is younger demographic and more feminine women vibe, right? Now, let me explain why I don't think that this is going to work. The first is the younger demographic, and this one is just a very obvious one. The name of the game is Flesh and Blood. You are not going to have a 15-year-old's parents, hearing that their kid wants to play a game called Flesh and Blood and be okay with that. Now, you'll have a certain amount of parents that just do their due diligence and realize it's just a good game, and it has math and there's good things about it, and they do let their kid play it. But by and large, I don't think a game called Flesh and Blood that's not in Targets and Walmarts and everything like that can proliferate itself in like a younger demographic, like that's below 16 or 16 and under. I just don't think it can happen, right? I think that the artwork style that they had previously, the OG high fantasy with a little bit of grit, I think that is perfect for 16, 17, and 18. I think if you just strip out all the gore elements, right, and keep like the high fantasy aspect of it, just don't put any like mangles in, right? Or snags. If you take that kind of stuff out, then it's good. But going where it's cartoonish fantasy, that's going like 16 and under. And that, I just don't think you're going to really do anything to because of just the name of the game. It's just plain and simple. Now, second is women and like female audience, right? So Flesh and Blood is a game that is a cardboard video game, 1v1. You are trying to kill your opponent with your weapons, and they're trying to kill you with theirs. It's a very combat-oriented, visceral theme, right? And now you have Pokemon, which has cutesy monsters, and all the it's more for everyone. Pokemon gets a 30% women to 70% male demographic, right? Let's just use that as a ballpark here, right? And that's statistics I got online, right? From something. I think I used AI for that one. So, but that's generally, and I think if you ask the Pokemon community, that's probably in line of the customer base of Pokemon. You have a game of Flesh and Blood. What do you think the demographics of this game are going to be? Like, you could put as many pink and purple cards in the game. You could make a full band. Don't stop with Pleiades. Make a guitar player, make someone on the piano, someone on vocals, make the whole band of pink and purple ninjas, and make 2 rune blades, pink and purple. You can make a bunch of them, but you're never going to get the 30-70 split that Pokemon is going to get, especially with the name, but more of just the gameplay, right? I feel like females and women don't like the 1v1 type, video game bash 'em up type vibe. And you can see this with, the video game community. It's that demographic there. So if you have that aspect and the name of Flesh and Blood, how are you ever going to get close to the 30-70 split of Pokemon? And you might say, well, Bronson, Flesh and Blood should be inviting for everyone and everything. And overall, you can try, but the more times you try to appeal to a younger demographic and a female demographic, the more cards and more artwork you push there, the more of your primary demographic of men will be alienated from the game, right? And that's like the big thing. Like the high spenders, I believe, will be alienated if it's pushed more into this. And I think even let's say that this was a good demographic to go into, even if you made the back of the card pink and purple, you try to pump out a bunch of female heroes, you make as much feminine stuff as possible, you're never going to get, even if you do it to the max, you're never going to get a 30-70 split for people playing the game or consumers like you are a Pokemon. It's just not going to happen, just in the nature of the game and the game name. Now, I don't want to ever just give problems. I want to give solutions here, right? Now, here's another statistic that's very interesting. There's a little game called Dungeons and Dragons, and they boast a 40% women to a 60% men ratio for their game. And this is general information out there. And that's kind of interesting versus Pokemon. So they have more women representation in Dungeons and Dragons, which is a very male feel of fantasy, and versus a cutesy monster type, more, it uses more like palettes and everything that women would like. And just in general, it's a very gender neutral game versus Dungeons and Dragons. How is that, right? And the reason is because of the gameplay. Dungeons and Dragons, I know this sounds crazy, is not a very combat oriented game for the most part. It can be depending on the dungeon master, but most of the time it's like 60 or 70% dialogue, social interactions between you and other characters. It's personalities. You have a personality, other people have a personality. It's relationships. You have different relationships with different party members and different interactions. It's very role play. Whoa. Yeah, you're role playing, right? It's a more social game. And that's why it appeals to women, because it has social elements and personalities and such. And in my opinion, this sounds crazy, but in my opinion, I think if Legend Story Studios and Flesh and Blood wants to get women and just younger demographic, I think PvE, as the Flesh and Blood community calls it, should be highly considered as an auxiliary product to get this demographic in there. Because if you look at just the percentages of D&D, and it was interesting from my research, it could even be more than 40% women that enjoy Dungeons and Dragons. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It's a more social game. So that's what I would really think of with Legend Story Studios and Flesh and Blood, of how they could capture that demographic without doing this soft rebrand. But I mean, at this stage, they've already done it, so it's kind of hard to say, oh, just peel it back. But anyway, that's my thoughts on how to really appeal to a younger demographic, but also female demographic. And it's funny too, because the community of Flesh and Blood has been hammering for PvE for the longest time. So it's kind of ironic that would be the thing, in my opinion, that's like the best thing that they could do at this point. But if you look at just the stats out there, go look them up for yourself. Pokemon gets 30% women to 70% men, and look at how like different of a vibe that game is versus Flesh and Blood. How in the world is Flesh and Blood ever going to get to those percentages without seriously alienating their target demographic, or men between 20 and 35, right? And the answer is I don't think they can. And that's the basis for why I don't think that they should go on this venture of really going into this rebrand even further. But because I think no matter how hard they push it, they're not going to get the numbers that they're desiring. The best, in my opinion, is to make an auxiliary product. And in my opinion, I don't care about auxiliary products. They can make as many auxiliary products as they want to really appeal to as many different demographics. The main thing I'm concerned about as a collector is the core product. That is what's changed. And that's why I'm a little animated, a little jittery, and like just making this known as like this is a big deal. Is because it's High Seas, Super Slam, and then now Compendium, right? These are sets that I would have loved to collect if they had artwork that appealed to me, but it just doesn't do it for me, man. And overall, it's kind of working out for me anyway. Just as a personal note, I'm buying the OG cards, the Rainbow Foil Majestics, at a very low price recently. And even though it's sad that they've hit those prices, I'm still in the game. I'm still interested in the game, but I don't really have any interest in these newer products. And overall, I think that a lot of higher spending individuals, but also just individuals in general, like those old style of artwork. And now that it's changed, it's a very subliminal thing that I don't think they've realized. They've truly realized how much they like the old stuff. And I think once they come to the realization that things have changed, they'll reflect and be like, what happened? So, anyway, that's really my rant about the subject as well. And overall, I want to reiterate, I really hope for the best. And I am just a normal guy in a normal room. I don't mean to make myself out to be like the most biggest wrinkled brain person in the universe. I'm just noticing stuff that's pretty obvious, that it's like the biggest change in Flesh and Blood history, but no one's talking about it. And there's no articles on it, no talk about it whatsoever. But they've done this soft rebrand that's completely facelifted the whole brand. And yet, why don't we have any discussions? It's very fascinating to me. But again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope this brings in a ton of women. I hope this brings in a ton of younger individuals. I hope this multiplies the player base of Flesh and Blood 2x, 3x, 4x. I hope that the game does great. But just based off of my simple logic and my understanding of the psychology or more basic marketing skills, the stuff that you learn in the first 2 weeks of a intro to marketing class 101, that you can't appease everyone, you can't please everyone, or else you're gonna please no one, or you can't have Flesh and Blood for everyone, because that's just when you say Flesh and Blood for everyone, it's really denying the core basics of marketing, which is you have a product, you have certain individuals who like that product based off of age, gender, race, and a bunch of different things, right? And you want to market your product and cater your product for specific demographics, right? That is literally the core concept of marketing. But if the whole reason why this is all being done is to more create like an ominous, like, gender neutral, age neutral, like omni product meant for everyone, then it's literally just slapping marketing 101 in the face and just totally disregarding that concept. That's how I really feel. And some people may call it like, you don't want to cast too wide of a net, that may be what some people call it. But overall, you can call it whatever you want it. But there's a very, very, very simplistic phrase that's told a lot. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos where if you try to please everyone, you ultimately don't please anyone. And that's really kind of the heart of this, right? But, that's a lot of words. Let me know what you think. Cheers.